This is the Straight Up Breakdown Podcast.
Exclusively on the Herd App Media Network.
Tell it to me straight up.
Hello, and welcome into the Straight Up Breakdown Podcast, proudly part of the Hail Varsity Network. I am Greg Smith, I got a little bit of a break from quarter zip weather here. We got a little warm up. I like it. My guest may or may not. I know he's a fall guy. I'm joined today by Hail Varsity staff writer Steve Marik. Steve, thank you for being back on the show. How are you, man?
Hey, Greg, thanks for having me on. And yes, it is getting colder. I am loving it. Break out the quarter zips. I just can't get enough. I was slightly disappointed it wasn't like colder in Minneapolis.
What was the game? What was the temperature? Wasn't it in the 50s?
At kickoff, I think it was like 48. I would have liked it a little bit more chillier, maybe throw in some snowflakes. Let's go. This is Big Ten football in the fall. Minnesota.
No.
Oh.
This is awful. Like now because I have to manage like what I'm gonna do outside. Like I want to be outside and be warm. Like I don't want to be out there and like my hands are cold. Also, the other thing, and this is a very like specific thing to like my role, is that when we start to get to this time of the season, it gets to be a lot more difficult to do what I do on the sidelines of high school games. Like I'm walking around with my gimbal and my camera and I'm trying to tweet out stuff and I'm trying to like, it's much more difficult as my fingers start to get frozen. As I got a little bit of a taste of this past week when I was out in Beatrice, but it was just the beginnings of the frozen fingers. Like by the end of the game, like it was a little rough. And I know that no one is playing this tiny violin with me right now on this, but still, like it starts to impact the job. I got to bring hand warmers and stuff. It's just weird.
Yeah, I've lived that life where you're on the sideline of a high school playoff game in November, and it's around 40 degrees and dropping, and you're
right,
and you want to tweet out stuff, and your fingers are shaking. Oh yeah, I've been there.
It's rough. Like, thing. Do you like what was, because you've done this too? Like, do you remember like what's the coldest one you've had to do? Do you remember?
Yes, I do. It'll always stay with me. I was at Elkhorn South, York, the York Dukes. Coach Glenn Snodgrass took the Dukes up to Omaha for a playoff battle with Elkhorn South. I believe they won that game like 10-3. It was just a great football game, defensive football game, but man, I don't know, 20 degrees it had to been. Yeah, it was. And for what I did, I took pictures in the first half and tried to get video in the second half, and man, some shaky footage, let's say. For that game. But yeah, it was Elkhorn South, maybe like 2018, 2017 when they won state. So yeah, around there.
So I think around that the same time, it was Xavier Betts' senior season. So the year that Bellevue West won state, and they were playing at, I don't forget who they were playing. It was a playoff game at Bellevue West. So it'll be a common theme. All of these will be playoff games unless you get something random. And I still I have all the pictures saved because like the amount of snow that they got like the day before, and then you had to push it to the side. And there was just ice everywhere, and it was just freezing that day or that night. And it is weird. Like some of those times, like you get to those games and you get there and it might be about 40 and you're like, oh, okay, this might end up being okay. And then you remember that temperature is going to drop like a stone, like as you go through the rest of that game, and you get to halftime and it's just rough. Yeah, I'm not looking forward to getting to that type of weather. But this year I'm gonna be prepared, man. I'm coming out there with thermals. Like I'm gonna be layered up and ready to go because you got to keep the content going. It's all about the content.
Yeah, just because it gets a little cold out doesn't mean you need to stop doing your job. So bundle up and get to it. That's always what I try to tell myself when I was shipping.
Right. I just hear Aaron's voice in my head saying, like, do it for the content.
Yeah.
All right. Now, each week we have a couple of segments that are mainstays of the show. The first one is called Coach Speak, of course, where we'll go over something that a player, a coach, or a talking head said, and we'll give you the straight up breakdown of what they meant.
Coach Speak to Real Talk.
This week comes courtesy of Nebraska defensive back Cam Taylor-Britt, who had this to say after Nebraska's loss to Minnesota this weekend. He said, quote, "We had to flip the switch and wake up. The whole defense, and not just even talking about myself, it's everybody on the team. Everybody's just got to wake up. We've been playing in these night games and everybody got to sleep in. I don't feel like everybody was awake and ready to play this game. So coming out in the second half, I was just on everybody to wake up. Let's go out there and play our football, and it showed in the second half.
Let's break that down.
Steve, what does this mean?
Yeah, so I think Cam is saying everything that fans wanted to say. Like they just didn't show up to start that game against the team that was ready to go. Coming now, I don't. Yeah, Nebraska played, what was it, eight straight weeks of football, and Minnesota was coming off a bye week, so maybe that has to do with some of it. But at the end of the day, if you're the coaching staff, if you're the players, your job is you're there to play a football game, and that was a game that you needed. Now it gets really dicey to try to get to that 6-win bowl qualifier. Yeah, if you're the football team, if you're the coaching staff, you need to be ready to go in a game like that. And yeah, maybe the 8 straight weeks of football had something to play with it. There was a lot of probably tired minds and bodies, but again, that's how the schedule, everybody goes through that. So that's what I kind of think Cam was trying to get at. He was saying everything that the fans were thinking at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is, to me, there's some layers to this one too, because I do think I agree with you that the 8 straight games probably played a role. And you can't, I guess I don't want to just completely throw that to the side, because that is a factor. And you do end up it matters that you played 8 straight football games, and so it just physically. But there was something that kind of two things that caught my eye that I definitely want to mention. One thing that caught my attention during the week was leading up to this game was Scott Frost telling his team that we've got to put everything into this and then we can get the break. I don't like that mentally. Like, I just think that as much like quote unquote progress as we've talked about this program having, I still think that the team overall, and when I say team, I mean the coaches and the players, are still too fragile for that to be the case. I just don't think that this program is in a spot right now where they can say, oh yeah, like it's all in on this one thing, and then we'll get to that break and we'll be okay. Because I just think that does something to you mentally when you're just not ready for all of that, right? Like, I didn't like that at all. The other thing that caught my attention after the game, and I could have included this in that quote from Cam, was him then saying his extended comments, or when he was maybe asked to follow up, you were in the room, was when he said that, coach noticed it too before the game and tried to call it out, and then guys still didn't wake up. That to me is concerning. I know, because I've heard it now for the last over 24 hours, that fans really grabbed on to the part of the quote that I read, and that we needed to wake up, and Scott Frost saying the stuff about juice, we didn't have enough juice. That's what everyone is paying attention to. But that next layer of coach recognized it, called it out, and it still didn't work, that part is really concerning.
Sounds like a bad recipe, right? Like a recipe for more losses like the rest of this season.
It really does, because it not only it's weird because we knew that the very end of the schedule with Ohio State, Wisconsin, Iowa, that part of the schedule was going to be tough no matter what. Now you add in the Minnesota loss, which is why you could not have lost that game. And now all of a sudden, Purdue looks kind of game the same way that I actually thought Minnesota, like, it ties in together, because I actually thought Minnesota, for as much as people had kind of talked about them, like, and kind of, I think, overlooked that game a little bit to some extent, and Nebraska was favored slightly on the road. I think people were doing the same thing with Purdue. And I think it was Derek that I had on maybe 2 weeks ago, where we were just talking about it, and he was like, people noticing that Purdue is actually okay this year. They're not as bad. I don't think they're as bad as people kind of think they are. And then lo and behold, they go out and pull off the upset, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But my point is that Nebraska's remaining schedule, there are no hey, they're just going to go out and win that game. And then when you combine that with, oh no, the wheels might be coming off mentally because they lost another game. It is a bad recipe for what still is 4 more football games left. It's just a really tough situation for them to be in.
Yeah, that's something that I've kind of noticed for a while now, obviously. And I know fans are called fans for a reason, they're fanatics and they think their team is, going to go in and win. But like going into the Minnesota game, Minnesota, I put along with like Purdue, as in they shouldn't be like these teams, these Big West teams that you think Nebraska should win should not be chalked up as wins and like as much as they are. Like there is no reason for anyone to think that Nebraska was going to go up to Minnesota and win that game just because it's Minnesota. There's like a negative connotation with like Minnesota and Purdue being these like, oh, Nebraska's going to go up there and win. Like, no, not at all. They are not as bad. That. Yeah, they're not as bad as people think. Minnesota is not as bad as people think. Purdue is going to come in here, might be ranked, right? They're not as bad as people think. The defense is better than you think. They have 2 quarterbacks that they could throw out there and do well. And then
I already have I'm shaking my head. Not sorry to interrupt you, but I'm shaking my head because it just hit me about what the storyline is going to be for that week leading up with the 2 quarterbacks. It's going to cause confusion. It's going to be, but and also at the same time though, Jeff Brom and PJ Fleck have had Scott Frost's number while they've been there and he's been here, right? Like it's 2 coaching matchups that have just not gone well, because and to illustrate your point even more, like it was 2 years ago now when Rondale Moore was hurt in that game against Purdue, and there was such a feeling about, oh, Nebraska's going to go get Purdue, they're going to beat them, and then they lost that game anyway. There's just, and people know this, but I feel like are still kind of reluctant to admit that the gap between these teams in the Big Ten West, and in the Big Ten at large, but in the Big Ten West, is just so small. Like there really just isn't all that much difference. And if you have a team that doesn't make mistakes and get in their own way, or the kind of what PJ Fleck was saying about having that strong culture and you know what you're going to lean on when times get tough, like it really comes out to your advantage. And Nebraska hasn't had that. And it really, and to your overall point, I agree. I think at this stage, like there are no like, oh yeah, Nebraska's just going to go win that game and we should just count that as a win. They're just not that program right now.
No, they aren't. And to piggyback off the 2 quarterbacks from Purdue, they're actually going to throw out 3 of them probably. The third ones are Burton. He's like a run first guy, just like Minnesota had to throw a change up into everything. But yeah, it's Nebraska fans need to realize that the Big Ten West teams that you think are going to be shoo-in wins are not them. Like Purdue is better than you think. Minnesota is better than you think. Wisconsin doesn't seem to have a quarterback right now, but they're going to be tough.
Yeah, but you can't, like Nebraska has not beaten Wisconsin since Bo Pelini was coaching here. Like I would never, and that was starting to kind of bubble up as people were thinking that, oh yeah, Nebraska will get back on track before the Minnesota game. And then when they get to Wisconsin, they can beat them and all of that stuff. Like that's one of those that you have to see it to believe it with Wisconsin. Yeah. Just the style clash in that game and the way that Wisconsin runs their program just isn't good. But the thing is, it's funny, we're talking about the fan aspect of this. I always have wondered this, and I really do think that the way things have played out shows this. I think that the players and coaches have a little bit of that feeling too, that, oh, we're Nebraska and that's Minnesota. They lost to Bowling Green. They're down. Their top 2 running backs, like they're not going to beat us. Like, oh, we're Nebraska. It's a new season and we're playing Illinois. That they wouldn't beat us. Like, I think that that's also a player and coach thing as well. I don't think that just inflicts Nebraska fans. And I understand why it does with the fans, like you said. That makes sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me at all why it feels like players and coaches also have that feeling, despite them continuing to say on a weekly basis, nameless faceless opponent.
Yeah. They say the right stuff in the press conferences, but I think deep down there's probably a little bit about that.
Yeah, like it's just, and so it's going to make for I don't even know what the word, my initial word was going to be interesting. It's going to be a lot of hand wringing. I still can't find the word of what the end of this season is going to be like, because I mean, as we've kind of alluded to, like I really think that there's a chance that they don't win another game, and that would be in year 4 of Scott Frost with a 4-year starting quarterback a level of experience and talent on defense that coaches would just kill for. Like, it just, like, you really want that level of experience and talent on defense, especially in this conference. You really need that. And for them to basically lose out, if that ends up being what happens, like, it would be very bad, obviously. And there are going to be some really tough conversations that will need to happen, because one of the things, and now I'll leave it here on this particular point because there will be plenty of time to talk about it. One of the things that I'm already starting to see bubble up, and I think that it's the wrong way to approach this, and maybe you disagree, is that, yeah, maybe, you know, they just need to come back next year with a like retooled assistant coaching staff. We're past that point. The really like kind of unfortunate thing about how this is all set up is that when you bring your entire staff with you to a job, that's your right. But then when things don't go well, you don't really take that reset button. That reset button or that eject seat is always there for coaches at the beginning of their tenures. We see it all the time, right? Scott Frost elected not to do that. And ride it out and double down. And then not only double down, like Mike Dawson left, he brought Mike Dawson back, gave him a different role, like all of that stuff. Like, I don't think that that's going to be the solution to this at the end of the year, if in fact there needs to be a change made, and if in fact they lose out, especially. It's just going to be, it's going to be rough if they continue to lose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you kind of see that across the nation in college football. Just the year before the coach kind of gets one more season, you generally see a staff shakeup, right? I mean, that kind of generally happens all the time. Most recently, maybe I remember Tom Herman at Texas.
Yeah, that was the first one I thought of, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Just like a shakeup with the staff, and then the next year, if things still don't go right, it's kind of the head coach's time. So, it'll be really interesting. There doesn't really seem to be like these last 4 games. They're all winnable games. I'll even put Ohio State in there, honestly, but I don't think it's like the usual juggernaut, even though they've kind of look like your normal Ohio State recently. But I just
but see, part of the problem too is for them to go like run the table to end the year would be something so incredibly different than what they've done under Frost at this point. I know for a fact, because I've looked it up before, that they've not won 3 games in a row under him. It's been few and far between for sure that they've won 2 in a row, especially Big Ten games, especially road games. Like, it's just, and so yes, technically it could happen. And I do agree with you though that if the Nebraska that played against Oklahoma in parts of that game, say for the penalties, Nebraska that showed up for Northwestern, obviously the one that played against Michigan, if they were to show up like that in these remaining games, they'd have a chance in all of them. But none of them are like slam dunk losses if they played like that. And none of them are also slam dunk wins, even if they played like that, right? So like that's where you get to this weird spot with this team.
Yeah, and I should clarify, I do think the remaining schedule are all winnable games, but I should clarify that that's extremely unlikely that I think that they're going to get to 6 wins and with this. So
it's a really, really tough spot. And I actually go back and forth on whether or not it's a good thing right now that they have the bye week. Because on one hand, yeah, physically it's obviously a good thing. Like, they played 8 straight games and they need to have that break, though it should be noted that part of the reason why they played those 8 straight games is because of the way that they kind of changed the schedule around, and they wanted that to end up being the case. But on the other hand, it would be nice for them to have a game so they could just get that one out of their system and get a win if possible. But we'll see kind of moving forward. Like I said, there'll be a lot of time to kind of dissect that in the coming weeks, because one of the things that I wanted to get to, and we one of the topics or parts of this we already kind of alluded to, was that there was a lot of wacky stuff that happened in college football over this past weekend. Like, the Nebraska game happened, and it was what it was. It was an 11 a.m. game. So after that, you kind of get an idea to kind of bounce around and watch some other games, which I always think is fun. Like, we don't get to do enough of that in this job. So it's always fun to be able to kind of, or at least live, to be able to watch them live. So I want to start here with the team that Nebraska is going to play next week, and a team they'll play, to close out the season, the Iowa Purdue game. Like, what was your level of surprise that was the way that game went?
Not surprised, because going into that game, I was kind of curious about it, and I looked up the recent history of that series, and I believe Purdue is now 3-1 in its last 4 games against Iowa. And so that, for whatever reason, I even sent out a tweet earlier in the week that, how Northwestern is Nebraska's kind of bugaboo, the team that always kind of seems to have like wacky games and just close games, aside from this year, obviously. But that is Nebraska, Northwestern is Iowa and Purdue. Just for some reason, Jeff Brom has Iowa's number. And an interesting fact, so before this game, Purdue they had won the last 2 matchups, and they had both those games where they were starting different quarterbacks. So no matter who was at quarterback, Purdue was getting out of that game with Iowa with the win. And I think it was they played 3 guys. Purdue did last Saturday in that win. They still got out of there with the win. So I generally wasn't surprised by Purdue's win, but man, it's just kind of wacky how there's just always that one team that kind of gives another a problem.
Yeah, it's always wild how that happens. And I think some of this with that particular series is just the styles that the teams play. And I think that in this particular game, Iowa being banged up in the secondary, like it was honestly one of the worst teams in the conference for Iowa to have to play. Because number one, obviously they kind of have their number for whatever reason, but then also the strength of them with their passing game with David Bell. I can continue to just picture him running up and down the field on them. It's just really interesting. Like, and it's crazy how some teams and it's weird too. Like, for on the flip side of that, the one team, even though we were just talking about them and like don't take the game for granted, Nebraska has in stretches at least played Wisconsin very close. Like, and to me, that's those scores, like if we've really watched those games recently, like they end up being like a 10-14 point win for Wisconsin, but it's always like, some like weird play where weird became like the norm with the special teams plays that Wisconsin comes up with against Nebraska. Or like Nebraska, if you go look at the yardage, Nebraska has a lot of yards that they put up on Wisconsin over the Scott Frost tenure. The points just don't match it up. Like, for whatever reason, like there are certain teams that just match up really well with others, and that Purdue team is definitely one with Iowa, and it's just an interesting clash. And frankly, what Nebraska's goal for their offense really was to like come into the Big Ten and like have that clash of styles and be able to execute that. They just haven't been able to.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said before, Iowa's defense was kind of banged up, especially in defensive backfield, and that was Riley Moss, a starting cornerback, not playing. And so to have your top corner not match up out there when you have a guy like David Bell, that's rough.
Yeah. Now, one of the other things too is Cincinnati got another win this week, so they're now up to number 2. I somehow, I don't know, somehow is the right phrase. I know how. I've become like the noted like G5 hater around the Hail Varsity network of podcasts. Like, there was a time that Derek had me on the Varsity Club literally to argue with me about G5's team making it to the playoffs. I don't believe they should make it, but have your own playoff. But Cincinnati is the exception to the rule for this particular season. I feel like they built the resume because to me, my whole point, and it's fair or unfair, part of my point is that if you're going to be a G5 team that like knocks down that door and gets into the playoff, you really need a 2-year resume to be able to do it. Cincinnati would have that if they continue this season and go undefeated. They won again this weekend. They are now number 2 in the latest AP poll that was released this morning. We record this on Monday mornings, and so like normally I am not rooting for this to happen because I think that they would just end up being a sacrificial lamb. But as weird as things have been this year in college football, like I'm actually kind of excited to see if Cincinnati can keep this thing rolling.
Yeah, I think they deserve the shot to go into a playoff. It's been 2 straight years now of them looking like the real deal, and I think that they really deserve a chance to get into the playoff and show people what they can do. I think it's good for college football and everything. And Luke Fickell has that program running strong.
Yeah, one of the things that, and listen, because of what also is happening around college football at this time, like with coaches being fired, and we're gonna get to one of them here in a second. I guess technically Orgeron wasn't fired, but we'll get to that.
It's weird.
So like that was a weird situation that we definitely got to talk about next. But like but how this ties in with Luke Fickell is everyone that's going to have an opening wants Luke Fickell, right? Like you don't even need to write that column when it comes like when you have an opening, like just copy and paste Luke Fickell's name in there. Like everybody wants him, right? But what I find really interesting about this is that if he can get Cincinnati to the playoff from the AAC, and then knowing that they're going into the Big 12, like I was reading about this recently, like they're trying to also build like upgrade some facilities and get like a football complex and all of that. Like there was a really good, it was Yahoo, I believe, maybe Pete Thamel that wrote it, right? It was really good, detailed look into their program where like their strength and conditioning coaches are out here making meals for the team, and like they don't have like nutrition and stuff. Like there is no Dave Ellis at the Cincinnati football program. So like as they continue to ramp that stuff up, like I wonder if that helps them keep him. Like he seems to really like it there. Like I think if there was ever a time to where like a coach says, nah, you know what, I don't really need to make that move to, you know, a different Power 5 league or to a quote unquote bigger job, because look what we've got going here. I'm an Ohio guy. And we're going to eventually get into the Big 12, and with Oklahoma leaving, like that thing's going to be wide open. Like who knows? Like we could go in there, raise our recruiting profile, and really start to do some things. I've now talked myself into this. Actually, now he should stay. I just think that's going to be a fascinating subplot as all of these teams now start, not all of them, but a lot of these teams start to have these openings.
Yeah, he does seem like a all Ohio guy, because I think in that same Yahoo report they said that he and his wife and family have like never lived outside of the state of Ohio.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, that wasn't that article. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I just think that the way he's got everything going on with that program and what that program has going on with the Big 12, I just think they have such a good thing going, and the possibilities are endless with them going to the Big 12, and with the playoff eventually kind of hopefully I'm getting bigger here. But yeah, I think that, you know, Cincinnati has a great thing going on, and Fickell is going to be the top guy when the positions come open, but it'll be really interesting to see what he wants to do.
Yeah, definitely. Now we alluded to this a little bit. The LSU situation that may have, well, actually, I was going to say this might have been the wackiest thing all weekend, but there was another SEC thing that we will get to that I don't know how to rank them, to be honest. They're parting ways with Ed Orgeron, who, I mean, he was great from a wins and loss standpoint overall at LSU. Obviously, they won the national championship a couple of years ago with kind of that huge run with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and all those guys, and like had all of those draft picks from the team. There's a lot to this situation because they also had not been winning at the level these last 2 years, like life after Burrow, basically. That LSU would want to see, especially given how much like those recruiting classes have been monsters as well. So it is not like lining up to what they need to be doing. And oh, by the way, and this is always a factor that you also have to watch like your rivals in the SEC continue to ascend or stay where they are, in the case of Alabama winning another national championship last season, right? And they also had that special tie with Nick Saban with him having been there. So like all of that on the field, but then you compound that with all of the stuff off the field. And I don't know if did you get a chance to read, it was The Athletic, right? That had all of the stuff about and how he had the creepy stuff with the administrator's wife at the gas station, and how, you know, basically Ed got divorced right before he had got that big contract with 6 years, $42 million extension. And basically the picture that has been painted from people in and around the LSU program is that Ed said, hey man, I want to live my life and kind of live the single life and be out here living the life after winning the national championship, which on one hand, like you can't fault him, and that's not like illegal or anything. But on the other hand, you can't then also like hit on an administrator's wife and then also like start to have that stuff affect your job performance, because there's stuff in that report about, hey, he was bringing women around the facility and that sort of thing. Like, you got to keep those two things separate, because the second that it starts to go wrong or it starts to go poorly with wins and losses, exactly what happened to him was going to happen, right? LSU's administration was going to be like, we're not going to look the other way so much on this anymore. Like, that whole thing is kind of a mess. But then all that being said, he's going to stay there and coach through the season.
It's so weird.
It's like, such a bizarre.
Yeah. And like you said, it's such a weird and bizarre thing, because it seems like he got too comfortable, I guess. And like when you get too comfortable, it starts affecting your work-life balance. Obviously there's a lot of off the field stuff with Ed. So they caught lightning in a bottle with Joe Brady being the offensive coordinator and Joe Burrow and that magnificent historical offense that they had.
Offense was so good.
Yeah, it was so great. But then just obviously, look, I'm not trying to tell another human being how to live their life and everything, but like, if you're the head coach of LSU and you're such a high profile character in a sport and like in a state, I don't think you should be doing stuff like that. Right?
No,
like, especially when you're not winning as much as you were previously.
And you know how you know that though is that you don't ever hear about this. Like, this never, like there are always whispers about coaches, because in general, like, they're like just highly paid guys that have good charisma. And so like you have like some like whispers every once in a while, but you generally like don't have the level of like, because there's like photos out here of like him half naked in bed with a woman. Like, you just don't ever see that, right? And that's how, like, and so you just have to be smarter about the situation. And you also, and it's like anything else, like, this is like, you know, anyone else listening to this in their job, like if they were out here living the life, wanting to party all the time, the second that really starts to affect your actual work, like, that ends up being a problem. Like, that's not something that would be unique to a college football coach. Like, that could happen to anybody. You just got to be smarter than to do that. Like, it's just not. And that's great. And what the thing I always think about in these situations, though, if this is the stuff that we know that has been reported, what are the things that are out there that have happened that, like, you know, he didn't either get caught with, or people just haven't really said yet, because they still kind of like him, as evidenced by, did you see that as part of the separation here, like, he's contracted to come to like a couple LSU events a year? Like, it's just so weird. Like, the whole, like you said, like, the whole thing has been bizarre. And then on top of all of that, because they had actually been working on this over the last week, like, they went out and upset Florida this week. Like, after all that, like, it's just such a strange.
It just tells you how good LSU can be if they have like a confident, no drama head coach, right?
Yeah, I've always like LSU is one of those programs that I always maintain like should never be just average. Like, not even like they shouldn't be bad. Like, they should never be average. Just because of the way, like, you go and look like the amount of recruits that they have in that state. Like, and then because they can also pull from Texas and you can pull from Florida, like, you basically have the whole Southeast. You've got obviously one of the best atmospheres in all of college football in Death Valley. Which is still on my bucket list for college football venues. I want to go there at night so bad. Like, I have a list, and that is way up there on the list. And so, yeah, they should never be average. And we've seen what it can be when it's really rolling. Like, we've seen it whether it was that 1 year with Orgeron, but what Saban had built there was really the blueprint of what it could be. Obviously, Les Miles had a lot of success there as well. And so we just see, like, and then so transitioning here and staying in the SEC, as we talk about all of the different kind of weird things that happen, like, I don't even know what to do with this Tennessee thing. So Ole Miss, obviously Lane Kiffin comes back to coach against Tennessee at Ole Miss. And first of all, I don't understand. I understand like kind of the fan base passion against Lane for leaving them like that to go to Oakland. The only thing that I would say though is that just as recently as this past week leading up to the game, Lane Kiffin actually came out and said on the record that he kind of regretted leaving Tennessee because he really liked that job. So then you get that as the background, right? And then you get into the game, and then Ole Miss is winning the game. The game is basically in hand, and stuff starts flying from the stands. Like you got golf balls flying at Lane Kiffin. You think he caught one? He definitely Odell'd that water bottle coming off of the field. Like there was the now iconic picture of the mustard sitting on the field from people throwing a bottle of mustard. Like I just don't like, and good on. I'll start with the good. Good on Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, for issuing a really harsh statement. Like he was really strong in his language about that not being acceptable. Like that was a good job to really react quickly to that. But I just don't even know like where to begin with what the debacle was that we saw in that game.
So I think a younger version of Lane and a more less mature version of Lane would have handled what went down at Tennessee differently. But I think I want to give him credit because I think as his career has gone on, he's grown up a bit, but he's still done a good job of staying true to who he actually is. And that's kind of like a quirky, funny dude that makes fun of himself and everything like that. So yeah, the Tennessee fans, they went into that game thinking they're going to go in with a war with this guy that kind of left us for the NFL. But that had to be that. I can't wait to rewatch it. Obviously, I followed it on social media when it was happening, but I can't wait to rewatch it and everything because, man, that environment was just like,
that was so like before that. And I think it was Cole Kublik who said this, is that Tennessee won't get, and for obvious reasons, will not get the like kudos for this. But the atmosphere was electric in there. There was a video that actually I shared in Slack with all of you guys about like a video from the atmosphere, kind of the light show that they had at Neyland Stadium and all of that. Like it looked really fun up until it didn't, in which things kind of turned. And I'm gonna have to go back and watch that too, because sneakily Ole Miss has actually become a fun team to watch. And as you guys who've listened to this podcast probably have now heard me say a couple of times here, like I have a little bit of investment in kind of Ole Miss and Mississippi State football because my wife's family is all down there. And so her and her side of the family are all Mississippi State fans. So me even giving credit to Ole Miss right now, I'm going to get yelled at if one of them listens to this episode. But then the other half of the family will be totally fine because they like Ole Miss. But like they've become fun to watch, and that series is now really interesting just because of like the two coaches that are involved. But Ole Miss plays a style of football, especially offensively, that you can't help but to watch, which is why it'll be curious. And we were talking about kind of coaches to watch, and that Luke Fickell is going to come up. It seems like Lane Kiffin's name continues to come up in some of these different things. And I even saw a thing where in regards to LSU with like, hey, maybe Lane Kiffin. But I wonder if, and the whole like he's matured thing, and I agree with that, is where this comes in. I wonder if he doesn't think, I'm happy at this place, if he is indeed happy. I should stay here and try to build here, because if I go, like if Lane goes to LSU, for example, or goes to, well, he can't go to USC because he was already there, but like LSU or like another big high profile, let's say Miami comes open, then that the pressure is different there. Whereas Ole Miss, yeah, they want to win championships, and I'm putting air quotes around this, but like really, how good are you supposed to be down there? It's kind of, and the blueprint is really in another part of the state in Starkville, right? Dan Mullen won enough games at Mississippi State for years that he was never going to be in jeopardy. He had a couple of 10-win seasons down there, had Dak Prescott and all those guys were kind of rolling in a nice way. They would have never gotten rid of him. And that's why, in part, like the State fans are so mad to this day at Dan Mullen for leaving, because they embraced him and they wanted him to stay, but he needed a different challenge and all of that. And I just wonder if Lane doesn't see that and think, I'll just stay here and wait it out. I've done the big job thing before.
Yeah, I think with these jobs that are going to be coming open, I think there's always going to be a possibility of Lane jumping ship just because of what he's done in his career. But like I said earlier, he's more mature now. So I think that likelihood is a lot less right now. But I think Ole Miss is definitely okay with being kind of like the cool guy, like, and just like maybe always always possible about knocking off Alabama. Always
Yeah,
possible.
we could
about,
always
like,
be in the mix.
can
Yeah.
always be in the mix, but maybe not just win a championship because, like, they're Ole Miss. Like, that can't happen. But I do
Yeah.
think they're definitely okay with being that cool team with a cool head coach and just being that kind of like team in the SEC.
Yeah, and especially if they continue winning the Egg Bowl, like that would also
Yeah.
help for them. But okay, so one thing I want to get to before we get to put them on blast, because we were talking about the coaching search thing, and I want to get your take on this. Mel Tucker, his name has come up already, like, and I mean heavily. His name was coming up, and I meant to share this actually when I saw it on Saturday before all of the news came out about Ed Orgeron. I think it was Feldman. I think it was Bruce Feldman on the Fox pregame show that said that, hey, the name that I keep hearing for LSU is Mel Tucker. And I honestly had forgotten that he was an assistant there under Nick Saban, and so there is a tie there. Obviously, he's doing a good job this season at Michigan State. When you initially heard that, what was your take, I guess, when you heard that like Mel Tucker is now kind of a hot name out there?
It's just all happening so quickly with that guy. That's what I'm thinking. Now, yes, it is kind of like an interesting name because he does have roots in the SEC, and he did work for some really great programs down there. I think he was on Georgia's staff too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he's like the style of offense that he runs to, like where like he still wants to run the ball, but then also like go off a play action and throw it down the field. That just speaks SEC to me, and it's just like everything that he's done. He's kind of like what he did that one year at Colorado, and then what he's doing right now at Michigan State. Like how far can he take the Spartans? Like obviously, like yes, you take a good look at Mel Tucker, so I definitely see him as a possibility. But man, it's all happening so quickly with this guy that makes you think like, is he for real? Like I don't know. We kind of want to see some sustained success, right, before we start like giving him these jobs. But yeah, he's definitely one to look. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, here's the thing that I would say about that, and this is because the other thing that will always naturally come up with him is, oh, he left Colorado so quickly, then he'd be leaving Michigan State quickly. And he hasn't had the same success, like you said. But hey, if LSU doesn't have a problem with it, then it is what it is, right? If they want to hire him, and if I'm Mel Tucker, I don't walk to LSU, I run. Like I would be down there so fast. Sorry to Michigan State, but there is always going to be a ceiling at Michigan State that does not exist at LSU. Your ceiling at LSU is national championships, and we could really build this thing or continue really into this thing being a power. Like you always are like, especially coming off with the amount of talent that they already have on the roster, we're a couple of tweaks away from being an SEC championship contention, right? Whereas at Michigan State, I feel like you almost always have to catch lightning in a bottle like you are doing this year to then be able to be, because if you think about it, like they're always going to be second fiddle in the state to Michigan, right?
Yep.
And it's always just going to be tough for them to consistently beat Michigan. They're generally going to be behind Penn State in the East. They're always going to be behind Ohio State in the East. And then you've got whoever you've got to try to deal with in the West, right? It's just a tough thing for me to see how you sustain that success. So if, you can go ahead and you can get that 1 year deal going and then go ahead and go to LSU, I absolutely take that if I'm him. But I do understand the reservations though.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm never going to fault a guy for like, getting a better job. Like all of his places that he's been, it's been a step up. I believe that Colorado and like, okay, so we got the head job at Colorado. That's awesome. Take a step forward to a Big Ten program, Michigan State. That was above Colorado in my book. And so, yeah, you're always looking for that next thing. And hey, if he's got it rolling right now, maybe strike while the iron's hot. So you don't have to show anything bad. So things don't get bad at Michigan State before they take another job. But I don't know. It's really interesting. And I see where the kind of people looking at him for that opening, I see where it's coming from, and I don't hate it.
No, I would at least this is what I always say about things that like I don't really have a vested interest in. Just keep it interesting. I think that would be interesting. So I definitely would want to see that. Now, every week we end the show with a segment that we call Put Them on Blast, where we basically put someone on blast or something that they did or said.
Put them on blast.
I've already spoiled mine because we've talked about it, but that's okay because they deserve to be mentioned twice. I'm going to go with Tennessee fans who I'm putting on blast. You can't do that. Like, you just cannot out here throwing stuff on a field. And I really, really hope that this is not a precursor of anything that we're going to see moving forward in some of these other rivalry games, because we've got a bunch of them left to come, because, you hit the downs, that end of season stretch, and you get that last weekend, especially where you get all these rivalry games. Like, I really hope that that's not something that other schools end up being out here emulating. But Tennessee fans definitely have to go on blast. And it did not do anything to really dissuade that feeling out there that Tennessee fans aren't really in touch with reality, because they're one of those fan bases that gets a lot of flack on social media for that. And in this case, it's all well deserved. And I think the Tennessee fans, for just like making a fool of yourselves and making a spectacle, they honestly could have called the end of that game, and no one would have really been like, too bent out of shape about it. But yeah, Tennessee fans definitely have to go on blast for that. Steve, who are you putting on blast?
I'd have to go with just Scott Frost and mentioning that little details got us. It's like, yeah, we know, everybody knows. So maybe just like stop saying that at post, like just, hey, coach speak, just like say nothing and say a lot. You know what I mean? Just say words that really don't mean anything. That's what I'm kind of looking at right there for him. But yeah, just little details got us beat. Yeah, we know. So that's just going to make everybody a little bit more upset, I think. So
was it the Michigan State game? Speaking of all the Michigan State talk, was it the Michigan State game where we all kind of felt like he was a coach that looked like he had no more answers? Was it? I think it was the Michigan State one. It was either I'm pretty sure. That's what it kind of feels like as we continue to say this, like the details got us, because and I know what fans will say, because I've had people say this to me. Well, hey, Greg, why don't you guys ask the follow-up question of how do you fix that? The reason we don't, and I'm be honest with you, the reason we don't is because there's nothing he's going to say to that, number one. But
yeah,
number two, like, what would you say to that? If I were to say, well, hey, coach, how do you fix those little details? There isn't really an answer for that, which actually underscores the problem, right? Like, because he went on to, speaking of the detail thing, he also continued that and said, like, all I'll continue to do is detailing it up. We'll keep detailing and see. And I just don't know. At some point, I think you have to come to the realization that a lack of fundamentals and attention to detail just is something that this program is under Frost. Like, that just for whatever reason, and whether and it kind of goes hand in hand with that special team situation, to be totally honest. Like, it's all in the same kind of mix, right? Of why they can't get that right, because they just don't pay enough attention to the details for whatever reason. They give a lot of lip service to it, but it's clear that they really don't value it. And so, and it's especially bad because you're in a conference in which that's basically the only thing that matters to the vast majority of teams that you're going to play. Unless you're playing Ohio State and Penn State, basically, teams that are really going to have a talent advantage, everyone else is basically in the same boat of, we know that we have to win by doing the little things. Like, it's that's the reason why Nebraska struggles so much with Iowa and Wisconsin, and now Minnesota too, is because those programs, like, they go to bed at night thinking about the details. They go to those practices and they know that if we don't do the little things right, we're going to get chewed out, or we're going to have to run it again. Like, they just know that it's in the DNA of those programs. And for whatever reason, it's not at Nebraska, no matter how many times he continues to say at press conferences that the details beat us. Because also, the other thing real quick is that at what point, though, do you just do something different? Like, you've obviously said this after at least 10 games. Like, something has to give.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned just doing the little things right, like Iowa. Like, look at Iowa. They're, of course, they just got knocked off by Purdue, but they're still sitting pretty. They're still a really good football program, and they have a really bad offense.
Oh my God, what do they do? So bad.
But what do? They have a great defense, and they have great special teams. Like, that punter, I think he's an Australian. He pinned Penn State inside like the 10. Like, I don't know, 3 times, 4 times. They have great special teams. They have great defense, and they're still winning like a good amount of games with bad offense.
Yeah, they'll still end up winning the West but even despite having like no sizzle on offense whatsoever,
None.
And honestly, a bunch of they have a lot of players on defense that I've said this before, and I think that Iowa takes a lot of players that I think other teams would get them in recruiting and think like, oh man, why do we take that guy? But you know what Iowa is, and this goes to that whole culture and we know what we are and what we're going to do. Iowa knows that guy right there may be a 2-star. He may not have had any a lot of other Power 5 offers, but I know what I can build that guy into because I've done it before with insert guy X, right? And you can see that on their defensive line. You see it in their linebacker core. They get some better athletes in the secondary, but they also get those better athletes in the secondary because those guys have been able to see a number of guys in Iowa secondary go on to the NFL, right? And so it's just interesting to just see the compare and contrast in what has transpired at Iowa, because this year is the perfect year to see it. Everybody thought that they wouldn't be as good. They obviously, and again, that offense is bad. But they still find a way to get it done because the other parts of the game are not neglected.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, I really respect what Iowa does with how they play and they develop. They're not flashy. They don't care about flash. And Minnesota is another program like that. I love, I know a lot of people like to make jokes about him, but PJ Fleck's also kicking Nebraska's butt, right? And I really respect what they have going on. You know what you're going to get. Opponents know what they're going to get from Minnesota, but I mean, games like Saturday still happen where they just keep coming after you. They make you make the mistakes. And, it's just, man, it just seems like Nebraska is not like other Big Ten West or Big Ten teams. They're just
still, and the reason to wrap all of that up is because they still struggle to have an actual identity. What we're really talking about is those other teams and programs, they know who they are, what they want to be, how they're going to get there. And honestly, we're 4 years in with Scott Frost, and we still really don't have a great grasp of what the team's identity is. And it was starting, and honestly, it was shifting, right, over the course of this season to where you're starting to run more of the Coastal Carolina flair option, their flavor of option, which I like. I like that idea, but we still just didn't. I still don't think we see enough of that. That's a whole different topic, but I just think that Nebraska struggles to find the true identity that they need. And so when the going gets tough, they know what they're going to fall back on, and they just don't have that.
Yeah, completely agree. And it's, if you're a fan of Nebraska, it's just got to be disheartening to see teams like Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota know who they are, and just win more games than you, and you're stuck in Lincoln, just running an offense that hasn't dove full in like Coastal Carolina is. So they won't do that. But that just leaves them to not really having anything that they can rely on, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Now that we'll leave it there for today. Subscribe to this podcast everywhere you listen to them. Rate us and leave us a 5-star review. If you only leave four, I am inclined to think you're a hater, and nobody wants that. Make sure you're checking out the other podcasts on the Hail Varsity Network: the Mind Your Own podcast, Varsity Club, Nebraska Preps Post Game Show, and the Hail Varsity Radio Show. Also, you can check out the Hail Varsity YouTube page. I am back on there with another recruiting question of the week video. You can get after us on Twitter at Greg Smith HB and at Steve_Marik. You can also email the show at straightupbreakdown@hailvarsity.com. I will catch you guys next week.
A Huda Media Production.